Okay, today we're going to do bridge work. So we're talking about tooth reduction for bridge preparation. Okay. I'm going to discuss first what are my preparation guides. Guides that I use to ensure that I have my enough reduction depending on the material I'm using. What are my prep guides that we use?
bears itself
Burrs. How am I going to use the burr?
بالكاليبر I can
Okay, measure the burr,
measure
but
the bear.
then
Reduction grooves.
grooves. So I use the burrs for grooves, create grooves. These grooves are created before you begin your work. On the facial surface, for example, incisal edges, on the occlusal surfaces, and these grooves help you. What else can I do with the burrs? Can I make indentations? What do I mean by indentations? I mean I could use a round burr with a specific caliber and then go and indent in the enamel with this burr. So it's not a whole groove, but an indentation. So I could use an indentation. What else can I do
Bears.
with burrs? I could use it as a measuring device. So suppose I finished my shoulder preparation. How deep is this? I don't know. So I bring a bear that I know the caliber of it, okay, the diameter of the bear, and I know exactly how deep it's working. So I put my bear. So if suppose this is my bear, so suppose this is the tip of my bear, and I place it in the finish area. So suppose this is a 1.2. So I know that this bear I have prepared more than 1.2. But suppose this bear is 1.5, for example, and when I went to seat it, I find that it's seated exactly in the area. So I know that I've done my 1.5 reduction. Okay, so I could use it for measuring. What else can I use it for? There are some specific bears, but before I go to that, to specific bears, before I go to that issue, grooves themselves can be multiple. Okay, let's just put them here. Multiple, or could be single. Some people I've seen, in textbooks they teach you to put three grooves, and on the upper half two grooves interrotating, so you would know exactly in two planes. You put your grooves in two planes, then you put another 3 or 4 on the occlusal surface, and so on. So it depends on the surface and the area you're doing. So they could be multiple. I've seen people placing only single grooves, and they were working with single grooves. So this is the idea of grooves. Okay, specific burrs. What are the specific burrs I could use? They are called depth limiting burrs, and they could be the burr that has a diamond on it. It's 2 millimeter. You have 1.5, and you have one is 1 millimeter. So you have different types. This working part is protected here by a safe ending, a safe cutting end. It doesn't cut here, it only cuts here. So when you put it on you indent it in the occlusal surface or the incisal edge, you know how much deep you went, depending on the case and how much you designed to go. So these are specific burrs. And you remember when you talked about veneers, the burrs that have like shanks in them, okay, these have different depth, and they have a cutting part and a non-cutting part. These are the non-cutting. These are cutting diamonds, and the distance here depends on the burr. You will have a 0.3 burrs, and sometimes you have a 0.5 burrs. Okay, so it depends on the specific burrs. These are specific. We also have another specific burr that I've seen also, that it's a tapered diamond, round, and it comes in many dimensions, but it on the tip of here, it has a non-cutting tip. Okay, so once you approach the tooth, this is the cutting end, this is the tooth, so it keeps cutting deep until this reaches the root surface or the cervical end of the crown. So it will run without cutting while this is cutting, so it limits the amount of shoulder or chamfer you're creating around your preparation. So these are specific types of burrs. Okay, then what else do we use as to control?
Reduction index.
Indices. Okay, indices. one is index. So you have index cut. If you suppose this is the tooth, a molar, you could cut the index like this and look at the reduction occlusally. You could cut the index like this and see mesiodistal reduction. You could cut the index on the buccal multiple planes, as you remember. When we talked about on the facial, we could know the reduction on each facial surface. So it depends on how you cut your index to use them. What other types? How do you know how much deep you went in?
Period probe.
Okay, probes could allow you to measure, especially from opposing teeth. Okay, so if I have occlusion and this is my reduced tooth that I'm preparing, okay, and I want to measure how much I went in, I could use probes to measure the distance, vertical distance, but also I could go with a plugger, for example, that I know how thick it is, and go from the buccal and see how much reduction I have. Okay. Okay, so I could get how much reduction by entering this probe and or plug and see how much reduction I have. What else can I have? There are planes. I've seen some doctors where, suppose this is my preparation, I want to prepare, this is the occlusal surface, I want to prepare this, they will do a plane preparation, not a groove. So that plane, they cut it from the central area of the most prominent part of the cusp downwards to the marginal ridge area. And then they bring bears measuring this and this depth of the plane. So it's plane reduction. So it's not grooves, it's actually planes. And they begin measuring the remaining enamel here and the remaining enamel here, and they differentiate, showing that they have done enough reduction. So it's a whole plane. What else do we have? You could use what is called the temporary bridge as a guide of your preparation. Your temporary bridge or crown. You're going to do a temporary crown, huh? So when you finished your from the wax up or from the actual tooth, the before preparation, you have made an index. So in that index, you place your temporary bridge or crown material. Once you place the bridge, so you have the prepared tooth, and then over it, you come with your temporary crown. Looking at the crown and gauging it, you could gauge actually how much depth you went in. Okay, so you can measure this by measuring the temporary. And if you show that, if you see, a show through or a thin temporary material, you know that you have under reduced. There is another way, it's a digital way, where they do a scan for the upper teeth and scan for the lower. Suppose I prepared the upper teeth, this is the natural tooth here, and this is the tooth that I prepared. So in these digital systems, they could get a scan of the cast here or the tooth from intraorally, and they have a scan here, and they have a side scan from the side where they scan the teeth in occlusion. So by that, the technician could actually measure on the digital device how much reduction you have gone from the opposing tooth and see is your reduction sufficient or not. Okay, so that's done digitally. And this is where it has been the solution and the salvation of all problems created between the dentist and the technician. The technician says you have not done enough reduction. The dentist says I've done it. Where is it in between? Maybe I've done the impression after 2 weeks. Maybe there is super eruption if the temporary was not incorrect, for example. So there are a lot of factors governing this. But the idea is once it reaches the technician and he looks at the scans digitally, he can measure the occlusal reduction from the opposing, and he will tell me I don't have enough occlusal reduction lingually. This will not be sufficient for our material that we have chosen, depending on the material that you have chosen. Okay, so this is digital. Okay. There are other methods in between. So in these cases, we are using opposing occlusion. In these three cases, the temporary bridge and the digital, and this is something called depth tab. Suppose this is a prepared tooth and this is our opposed occlusion. Okay, there are you see these wedges? Okay. They look like these wedges, okay, but they're not actually this size. They are larger and they come thick, okay. So these are like this. If you can give me this, it looks something like this, okay. This tab is made out of a type of rubber, okay? And that the patient will bite on it in between teeth. So the dentist will know if he had done enough reduction or not, depending on the disclusion of other teeth. So if he had done enough reduction, the other non-prepared teeth are intact. They come together. So they call it a prep check tab. They have different thickness. There is 1.5, there is 2, depending on the area you're working with. And even sometimes the technician could, the dentist could also place an articulating paper beneath it and let the patient bite on it. Because it's rubber, it molds itself to the shape. Because it's rubber, it will mold itself to the shape of the crown or the occlusal surface. So it will, but it stays in the same thickness. So suppose I have underprepared here, and I have an articulating paper beneath it. It will mark here that it's high, for example, or it's high here. This is my prepared tooth. So it will mark with the articulating paper on the teeth here, and on the teeth here. So I'll know where is the heavy spot. I know that this is under reduced. Okay, this is another way. Then we have the final one is vision, and vision is not very accurate in have I done enough reduction or not. It's not a very accurate way. You could use instead of this tab. I teach sometimes my students. I tell them, bring me. You have them in wax in some books. They tell you bring a wax and bite on it and measure it. I have another way where I bring a utility tab, just utility wax. I mold it together until it becomes like a tab, okay? And I insert it over the tooth that I have prepared. So what will I get? Inside that tab, I will get the indentations of the tooth with its opposing one. So I'll have like indentations here, okay? So I'll measure these indentations using the gauge, okay? And the gauge will help me. I could use other than utility wax. This is utility wax. I could use regular wax, base plate wax, okay? There is another way. Sometimes I even tell my students you can use rubber. Suppose I've done my preparation and I've taken a bite using the Oculofast. I'm taking the bite anyway. So with the rubber, I could measure it. Over the prepared tooth, I could measure the thickness between the opposing tooth and the tooth prepared, and measure in specific areas if I have done enough reduction or not. So the rubber itself, the Oculofast that I'm taking the bite with, is also another way to gauge my preparation depth. So all of these are methods to gauge and ensure that I have done my correct preparation. Okay? Thank you.